Okay, so for those of you who don't know, the trailer for Infinity Train and the announcement of when it's coming, that being, I think it was August 5th is when the first 2 episodes are going to air properly, was accompanied by the early release of the first episode. And I couldn't not talk about it after watching it. I am probably going to end up revisiting it again on August 5th when it drops properly, for reasons that I'm about to touch on. But I watched it, it was interesting. I talked about the original pilot mini. I talked about the trailer. I feel like I should talk about this as soon as possible so you guys know my complete opinions on Infinity Train as it exists up to this point. Now, we also learned that Infinity Train is not in fact going to be a full series. It's going to be a mini-series in the same vein as Over the Garden Wall. It's going to be 2 episodes a night for 5 days. So this first episode is actually meant to air concurrently with the second episode, which is why I'm going to revisit this episode after the 5th when I review the second episode, because if they're meant to go hand in hand, if they're meant to air together, then I'm probably going to feel compelled to talk about them together. And I have to admit, the title Infinity Train, man, it screamed long-running series to me. It screamed the next big series. Infinity is literally in the title, so I was of the understanding that this was intended to be a long-form story. But no, apparently a short mini-series like this is always what the story was envisioned as, so I'm keeping an open mind. Though I have to say, I've watched the first episode a couple of times now, and as much as I did enjoy it, I'm also a little worried about it. And that's primarily what this video is going to be about. It's not going to be as much a proper review as some of my other reviews of episodes. It's going to be more me treating this first episode or half episode or whatever you want to call it as a first impressions of the show overall, and how it's different, how it's better, and how it might be worse than what was implied by that initial pilot short. And I'm going to do so by primarily focusing on what made this different from the pilot. First of all, the pilot starts up when Tulip, our main character, has already been on the Infinity Train for an entire week, trapped there, working her way through different puzzle rooms, and it looks like she's only on the 3rd one by a week later. And they are treated as puzzle rooms. It doesn't seem that you're able to move on to the next one until you solve some kind of puzzle, with the exception of the rooms which have entire worlds in them, like Corgi World, whatever it was called, I can't even remember anymore. But then you could say that the challenge there is working with the locals to find where the door is so that you can exit. In this first episode, the grid car, Tulip finds her way onto the train under circumstances that I'll touch on in a moment, and comes across 1-1 and then moves into this grid car where it looks like when you apply a specific amount or like direct enough pressure to these square grid boxes, I guess you would call them, throughout the room, blocks appear and you can form different things out of them. And it looks like if you go overboard with it, you might fill up the room too much and lock yourself in or something, but it also seems like you have to intentionally trigger them, so I don't see how you could ever really cause yourself a problem like that, I guess is the best way to put it. Like, it really does seem like you would notice that that was going to happen and be able to stop before it actually did. It doesn't really seem to be a legitimate risk. And it was cool and all. There was a bit of an action climax to the episode that I'm not going to talk about much here because I don't feel it's necessary for this format of video. But there was an action climax here, and they made good use, Tulip and 1-1, made good use of the properties of this room to deal with the threat of that action climax. But the room itself didn't have that puzzle quality to it, and I'm slightly worried that whereas the promise of the show based on that pilot was that this was going to be sort of a cerebral show with puzzle elements and the characters were going to have to solve puzzles to get from place to place, that the series itself is going to fall back on action elements in place of those puzzle solving elements, and that does disappoint me a little bit. I could turn out to be completely wrong about this. Maybe I'm just reading too much into this first episode, which was meant to hook an audience, but it was an impression that I got, so I felt I should talk about it here. But really, that's the only thing about this episode that I didn't like, was the slightly bad feeling I got from the way the episode was resolved and that room was portrayed. The rest of it was really good. I like Tulip here even more than I like Tulip in the pilot. She feels more like a real person. She's not as distant and cerebral as she was in the pilot. She has emotional layers to her, and what helps with that is we get to see a bit of her home life before she gets on the train. We find out that her parents are separated, that they were going to take her to a game programming camp or a computer programming camp or something. She wants to be a game designer, but that because they both have their own lives now, they accidentally overbooked themselves, and now neither of them can get her there. So she runs away from home. She tries to get there on her own, and we actually see, at least it seems that we see, how it is that the train picks its victims. It seems to be that anyone who is lost and happens to intersect with an area where it can breach into our dimension can be enticed into boarding by the train. It just stops right there in front of you and then indicates to you that it's heading to the destination that you're looking to reach yourself. And that's why Tulip initially gets on. I don't know why she would do that, since she didn't have a ticket, and she seems to know what train stations are, so I assume that she would recognize that trains require tickets, but she does it anyway. I'm thinking that maybe there was like a bit of a hypnotic kick to it to draw her in, and I'm also thinking that maybe the train only specifically goes after people who are intelligent and logic-minded enough to actually progress through the train. This is really cool. It's the kind of thing that other similar miniseries to this, Over the Garden Wall comes to mind immediately, might not have shown us right away. Like Over the Garden Wall threw us immediately into the action and then revealed the backstories of the characters later on. This doesn't do that, and it's kind of refreshing. Like, on one hand, it does, I guess, take away some of the intrigue regarding who Tulip is and where she came from and how she got here, but at the same time, I like that this is telling a linear story. We also get to see why you can't just leave the train. It is definitely in some other dimension or world or something aside from ours. There's weird creatures out there and otherwise just wasteland everywhere. And also the scale of the train is significantly different in this versus what it was in the pilot. The train feels enormous. Like, you get the sense that just crossing from car to car carries with it its own dangers. And that was super cool. At the end of the day, though, this first episode really wasn't much more of a taste of this world and its characters than what the pilot was. In fact, I'd even go so far as to say that despite all of the background stuff we got for Tulip before she got on the train, it actually felt like less of an introduction than the pilot did, because we don't even get to Corgiville. We don't even meet the King Corgi or anything like that. Like, I get the sense that's probably going to come next episode, because I get the feeling that that's really where the story is going to take off, and I don't think they would take too long to get us to that point of the story when it's only going to be 10 episodes long. But it did not happen in this episode. Which brings us back to what I said about the episode earlier. I enjoyed it a lot, but I'm not really 100% sure what to think about it or how to feel about it. Like, for example, we see Tulip discover the glowing number on her hand, and she has a very visceral reaction to that, because that's super unusual, obviously. But there's no equivalent scene to the one in the pilot where she's trying to logic her way through what it might be, how it got there, and what its purpose might be. And maybe that scene's going to come later. Maybe we just haven't seen it yet. But this version of Tulip so far seems like a much more emotional being than the one from the pilot. And yes, that gives her more layers, but at the same time, because seeing her that way in this first episode wasn't offset by something like that very logical, very puzzle-solvy kind of scene, it leaves us with a very different impression of this character after just this one brief outing. This really is one that I'm not going to be able to form a proper opinion about until I've seen more of it. Again, I liked it. I liked this episode a lot. I still think this is going to be a really good show. I want to make that clear because I'm coming off a little more negative than I think I'm intending to with this one. If you like the pilot, you're going to like this too, I think. But, like, if this is intended to be a complete story told effectively all at once, and it does seem that that's how it was always intended to be, I think this is one that I'm going to have to see the entirety of before I can decide really anything about it, before I can form any real opinions about it. So I'm probably actually going to end up reviewing the whole thing at once, like after the entire thing is aired. But yeah, those are the things, at least so far, that are significantly different between this and the pilot, and my feelings on it, and my very, I'm hoping, unfounded worries about the direction that the show is intending to go. I guarantee, though, once the Corgi comes into the story, I'm going to be a lot happier about it one way or the other. Still, reservations or not, I'm super excited to get another one of these mini-series type stories like an Over the Garden Wall. This story really appeals to my sensibilities, still, despite the small reservations that I do have, and frankly, August 5th can't come soon enough. As per usual, though, guys, I'd like to know, what did you think of the first episode of Infinity Train, the grid car? If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.